Hello and welcome to the big picture. It has been a year of series of ups and downs for Russia. After having been seen as a key figure in bringing Iran to agree to inspection of its nuclear site several months back, the Russian President Vladimir Putin is now under tremendous pressure following the shooting down of Malaysian airlines over the Ukrainian territory. The Western nations have directly blamed Russia for having supported the pro-Russian rebels in Ukraine who are allegedly behind the airline shoot down. The Americans have even gone to the extent of saying that there are evidence to the Russian involvement, and the British Prime Minister has also charged Russia with playing into the hands of the rebels. However, Russian President has strongly denied their involvement and asked not to politicize the issue. However, the cries of sanctions against Russia. Today we'll discuss what will be the impact of this global outrage to the shooting down of the Malaysian airliner on Russia, and also how it affects the goings-on in Ukraine, and if this will lead to any fresh realignments and how India should look at these developments. To discuss this, I have with me VB Soni, former Indian ambassador to Ukraine, Air Vice Marshal retired Kapil, Professor Ajay Kumar Patnaik, Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies, JNU, and Nandan Unnikrishnan, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Welcome to all of you. Air Marshal Kag, I would like to come to you first. Do you think that this shooting down of these Malaysian airlines and all, and what the kind of speculations which are going around, how it was shot down and all, you think that it had to be some very sophisticated missile which had to be used, and which is not something which is available with normal people or even the normal rebels.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified. No, I mean, it's firstly, some facts have been established. The aircraft has been shot down at 33,000 feet in civilian airspace,
right,
which is being frequented by many airlines. Incidentally, an Air India aircraft was reportedly just 25 kilometers away. So imagine the catastrophic consequences we would have had,
yes,
with the Dreamliner 380 being, meeting this fate. But to come to your point, it has been shot down. This height, it's not a shoulder-fired missile,
right,
which will take on low-flying targets. This means a very, very sophisticated missile system, reportedly the SA-11, and some even talking about the SA-17, but it's most likely the SA-11, which is a radar-controlled missile. And obviously, the system cannot be operated, as you rightly said, normal rebels.
Right.
There has to be a very sophisticated level of technology, management by individuals who are fully conversant with the system, trained for it, done operational exercises for them to sort of get the success that you can expect from this missile. It's too early to be concluding precisely how it all happened. That's why the need for very credible, legitimate, comprehensive international investigation on this, for which President Putin is actually between a rock and a hard place, because he alone can ensure that the rebel-held territory in Ukraine is sanitized against any challenges to the investigators,
right,
and that everything that will bring out why this happened and created such a catastrophic geostrategic crisis involving not just Russia and the West, but I think the entire global system, because it's now brought to a stage where Putin he's between a rock and a hard place. That we'll discuss later, but essentially this is what it is.
Mr. Soni, where do you think Russia stands now? Because, there has been international outrage against it, right, and rightly so, and but Russia seems to be saying that, we are not involved. Is there credibility? Is there a credibility crisis as far as Russia is concerned when it's defending itself here?
First of all, it was not a deliberate act. Let's be very clear on that.
It's not. You don't think it's a deliberate act?
No, I don't think it is, because the civilian airline was not the target. They are trying to hit each other. It has happened. Helicopter and planes, they have been brought down. So to my mind, that is not the intention behind. It was an accident. But I also take the point that this kind of a sophisticated system couldn't have been fired. But the Western countries are saying that there was a movement of a convoy of various vehicles, launchers, etc., which was seen to be entering through from Russia to the Ukrainian border, and they are now back. To my mind, to train people to operate such a sophisticated system isn't really easy.
Right.
But the thing is, it happened. Why did it happen? To my mind, there was problems from both sides. If the rebels, which are operating in the eastern part, they may be under advice or control, if you may very well say that. But there are problems also on the Ukrainian side. Why is it a civilian area was made out of bound in case there was even a danger within a radius of whatever the safe area is? So to put the entire blame on Russia or the rebels is not really correct. There were things which happened, but to establish that, it is necessary that an independent body should be, and it should be of experts. To my mind, the independent body, which is UN sanctioned, which is a UN body actually, is ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. They have the wherewithal. They are the ones who are in a position to determine how it happened, when it happened, and why it happened. That is the first thing.
It's interesting, Would you like to respond to that? Because, he has a very interesting point. You can't, it's too early to say that Russia were involved. His contention is that.
No, I don't think I understood that. What I understood from Mr. Soni's intervention is that this is a catastrophic mistake.
And it was not aimed at this airline. It was
made by the rebels. No, that's what I want to explain just 4 points. One is that this is not the first time aircraft has been shot over on this rebel-held territory. They have shot down AN-26s of the Ukrainian armed forces in 2 occasions, recent past. I'm only talking about weeks past. So that has happened.
And since they were
but they have
Ukrainian
made a
Air Force, there was not this international outrage because it was not a passenger aircraft.
It was not a passenger aircraft. It didn't receive media attention anywhere. Right. But the fact is 2 of their AN-26s have been shot down by the rebels, obviously with the same type of equipment. But I want to bring in another dimension to it. Mr. Putin has been hedging his bets. It's in relation to the topic under discussion and in the context of the remark made by Mr. Soni that in May elections, he actually withdrew all the equipment and forces that had been inducted there after Kiev was, after Crimea was occupied by the Russians. Then what he saw was Poroshenko's forces were getting the better of the rebels. So that decision he felt was counterproductive, and that's why he inducted the forces back, and this time with surface-to-air missile systems. Now these are obviously range of missiles, not just SA-11, which is reported to have shot this down, and of course mistakenly because they were thinking that this is an AN-26 or a military aircraft, and that's what the the voice transmission that has been captured by the West
which is being denied by the Russians.
Being denied. The last point is, it cannot be that Russia is not involved. Frankly, it's a question of direct. Russia again is not involved in shooting down the aircraft, but certainly involved in giving the rebels sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems with which they have shot aircraft of the Ukrainian Air Force in the past, and therefore mistakenly they have shot down MH17 thinking that this is an AN-26, and they themselves realize as the voice interchange actually brings out. So the bigger problem, Girish, if I can get just 30 seconds, is this is geopolitics at its worst, competitive geopolitics, where the NATO creep into Russia has raised neuralgia in the Putin leadership, and therefore, despite the many agreements they have arrived at between the West and the Russians, the creep has taken on all the time. It has not stopped.
Okay.
You induct secret military forces and get them to join the military and other thugs in that area, both sides. So you are heading for a horrible tragedy unless there is some maturity on the part of
Nandan,
leadership.
Nandan, would you agree with Air Marshal Kak there that it's this geopolitics at its worst, and what kind of a motive do you see for this kind of attack which has taken place, and where do you see Russia there in all this?
Well, absolutely. No, this is geopolitics at its worst. I would also tend to agree that Russia's responses are governed by the feeling that it is being cornered, that it is being, its areas of influence are being encroached upon. So Russia will respond aggressively to any kind of encroachment. But where I disagree with is that Air Marshal Kak, of course, is an expert, so he would know best. But still, I think the jury is out on where exactly this missile arrived from. I'm not questioning that the rebels fired it, but where exactly the rebels got it from. I'm not entirely certain that all these so-called conclusive evidence that there were these launch vehicles crossing the border and then crossing back will ever surface if there is an impartial inquiry. So I think while agreeing that an impartial inquiry should be held, the problem will be establishing such an impartial inquiry that is acceptable to all sides.
Okay, that itself can become a problem, Professor Patnaik. You think that this now we know that this tragedy has happened. We know that so many people have died. We know that from where it was fired and all that. But ultimately, the question is, what kind of inquiry can we expect to happen?
Well, first of all, this conflict is also, it's not just military conflict, it's a propaganda war also. You see a lot of propaganda war that is going on. Nandan was right in saying that, all these pictures and sometimes conversations that surface are questionable of questionable nature.
Which Russians are questioning, in fact.
Yeah, even the conversations or the convoys, because earlier in this conflict itself, we have seen various versions at various points of time coming out. See, the point is, yes, it was fired. There is much to believe, as Ambassador said, that it was not intentional, may have been,
The target was different.
Because this is a conflict zone.
There was an intention to fire, but the target was
No,
different.
my point is different. This is a conflict zone where one side is using heavy aircraft, military aircraft, helicopters to bombard civilians. So a region which is trying to defend itself doesn't have that kind of air power. What it does have is surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft missiles.
Where did it come from?
So,
the question is, where did it come from?
In today's world, say, be it in Syria, be it in Libya, be it in Iraq, weapon systems are moving around. But here in this case, there is a lot of what others are saying. There is reason to believe that there are state or non-state actors in Russia which are providing this help.
As Air Marshal Kak said, these are very sophisticated weapons, 33,000 feet. At 33,000 feet to fire and be so accurate, you need to have sophisticated systems.
There are also Russian...
And which rebels cannot be having that.
If you study the Russians questioning certain things, first of all, that why were Ukrainian missiles, Ukrainian states, anti-aircraft missiles, when the opposition doesn't have air power, why were they in that region? Russians have already given evidence that Ukrainian armies, missiles, surface-to-air missiles are in this region also, in eastern Ukraine. Why are they here when the rebels do not have any air power? The second thing they are asking is, why the path deviation from the path? The third thing they are asking is, why lowering down the height of the flight? All these questions need to be answered.
No, fine. I think
that is why the credible inquiry is required.
I'll get back to Nandan because Nandan wants to leave. Nandan, the question now is, where will this all lead to? Because there is the Western nations have got together. Not just Western nations. There is an outrage about this across the world. You think that Russia at the international level, at some of the successes it has had in foreign policy recently, this will come as a major dampener on it. Will it lead to a situation where it may lose some friends in the international international scenario?
Girish, before I come to that question, I just want to answer a couple of points.
Right.
One is, as someone already pointed out, several aircraft were brought down in this area in the past few weeks.
Right.
So it would have been logical for any country that controls that airspace to declare that this is a no-fly zone. Now, if it was a no-fly zone, obviously, if Putin would declare it a no-fly zone, I think the whole world would have castigated him for that. So the Ukrainian government should have, in all fairness, declared it that international civilian flights should not fly over there. That's point number one.
Okay.
Point number two, Western reporters have spoken to some of the rebels and have established that there are sufficiently skilled airmen amongst them who are capable of operating the Buk missile. They may not do so with great precision, but the point is that while they may be unskilled or lack skills to distinguish between the signature of a military and a civilian aircraft, they are capable of lining up and through radar firing a missile. That's point number two. Point number three, will Russia lose some of its sheen in the international arena? Definitely, it will lose some friends. It is looking increasingly isolated. And I think the Russians have to learn a lesson that if you're going to play the game of proxy war, supporting separatists, disasters like this can happen. And that you have to be very, very careful about promoting separatism in another country. I think the Russians have to learn that lesson. But so must the rest of the international community, because in all fairness, it should be pointed out that it is not the Russians who started this. The first takeover of territory, buildings, and attacks against a government started in February when a different president, a different democratically elected president, was in power in Kiev.
Right.
So the shoe actually is on the other foot. So if all that is taken into account, there is only one conclusion that can be arrived at, that the international community has to sit down along with Ukraine at the same table, and there is no option but to a peaceful settlement of this issue. There is no military solution.
Okay. Thanks, Nandan. Thanks for those very valuable comments which you have made. Ambassador Soni, would you agree with Nandan?
I think basically I would agree, but the only point I would like to point out is that even within the West, there are no divisions, but there's different point of view. There is Angela Merkel, who takes a very positive attitude. She's not very strident. Because they have interest.
In fact, the British Prime Minister is not too happy with the way the Germans and French have reacted to the situation.
Because who has stakes in there? German companies, I think $40 billion or something like that they have. And second thing is the transportation of gas and energy. Okay, you are thinking of long term. Presently, for this winter which comes, where will this come from? I mean, you can find alternative places and alternative sources, but in the ultimate, at what cost? So to my mind, it is important that the sides take place. The discussions are not taking place directly between the two. You see, by proxy you are talking. I mean, Putin is talking to the US president and the two foreign ministers are talking, but where is the common ground for the two direct concerned parties to sit down together and see what exactly do they want? So through press releases and media, if you were to conduct diplomacy, it's not going to have any solution, to my mind.
Kapil, Admiral Khan?
No, I agree with both my panelists, including Nandan, who's just left us. The first point is, early into this Ukrainian crisis, geostrategically, Putin has already preempted any Western exploitation of the gas situation in Europe by signing a meta deal with the Russians, with the Chinese on the eastern side. It's a $400 billion, $500 billion worth of deal, which is unnoticed in any international media, but of amazing strategic significance, because over a 30-year cycle, $400 billion worth of gas will be supplied by Russia to China, and China is hungry for energy like we are. Secondly, this also created impulse because now there are talks about India and Russia doing similar gas transfers in huge pipelines. But what I want to mention is the issue of how does it affect Putin? I think maturity...
How does it affect Putin, and how does it affect Russia in its dealings with other countries?
That's the key point we have not addressed. You know, he, as I said earlier, is between a rock and a hard place. And I think he has been reasonably hedging his bets so far until this outrage of the world by the shooting down of the aircraft, which neither he can be directly blamed for, and as has been mentioned by the panelists, even the rebel fire has been an accident. But here the question is that unless he and the Western leadership show a degree of maturity which the international system has seen in the past, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a U-2 of the American Air Force actually went deep inside the Russian space, then Soviet space in Alaska. And the crisis was diffused immediately by Kennedy publicly apologizing that there has been a mistake. Later in 1988, we saw...
Are you suggesting that Putin should apologize for this?
I'm not suggesting it's an option, but surely an option. He has to be reasonable because he is now in the doghouse, quote unquote. He will get increasingly isolated. He may not get invited to the G20 summit in Brisbane, which is coming up in the next few months. His economic sanctions by the West will be very, very hard, despite the French and German position being somewhat moderate. But I think he faces an outrage because another reason is while national interests are, of course, the guiding factor in the conduct of foreign and security policy, we also need to know there are some things called values in international relations. Here is a global common, a platform carrying multiple nationalities.
Mr. Soni, are there global values?
See,
in international relations?
It depends. You see,
however much we all agree that there needs to be one, are there?
No, but there must be. Because without that, it will be jungle.
So would you agree with Air Marshal Kag that, Putin could come and apologize?
I think
you think that is expecting too much.
See, let me...
Too early to do that. Let an investigate. He should. Sorry, I'm sorry to...
Please.
I think the key point, Girish, now at this point is there should be an international, multilateral, professional investigation. I would not go along with Nandan's point that it should be done by ICAO. Actually, ICAO is the biggest mistake maker in this incident.
No, I think
they should have ICAO.
Mr. Soni, it was Soni's suggestion.
Not only that, I say, look at the Ukrainians. What about us? What action did we take? Our airliner, a Dreamliner, would have been shot down. So therefore, the civil aviation entities of nations have to have some experience of what's going on in the world.
Yes, Professor Patnaik.
You see,
I'll come to you, sir.
I have a slightly different take on this. The Russians by now realize the new Cold War is emerging. Whatever they do, the emergence of Russia, whenever a system, old system is in Christ's decline and a new system is emerging, new powers are emerging, there will be tension. Because the old established status quo powers are not going to give up their power so easily. So Russia, China, they should be prepared for this kind of global, set up cornering them, isolating them, propaganda wars against them should be prepared. Now, somewhere, obviously, because of certain things, they will be in the dock for a certain period of time. But we have seen Russia is not Syria. Russia is not Libya. Russia is not even Iran. That you could bully a country like Russia by a propaganda war. Obviously, it's not possible. Ambassador is right. That why is German Chancellor immediately talking to Russia? Even for an international inquiry into this, they both are agreeing. So you will find that there are definitely different, opinions within the West itself. The new Cold War is not going to be the same Cold War of, the West on one side and the communists on the other side. This is not a communist Russia anymore. These are now power blocks which are emerging, which are challenging. And you just cannot just put a blame and say that you apologize or you are in the dock. It's not going to happen that way.
Okay, that's interesting. Yes, before I go to
No,
very quickly.
I think you also have to realize that Putin is in a huge dilemma. If he were to, as has been suggested in the Western world, and I agree entirely with Ajay on this point, it's an information war. And who leads the information war in the world? It's the West. Because the biggest consumers of that information is the entire globe. The question is, if he sort of gets his equipment and systems back to Russia from this area, President Poroshenko will have a field day there. So that is a strategic defeat for Putin. How do you avoid that for him?
That is where
so West has a responsibility.
No, that's where your earlier statement, rock and a hard place, comes in.
What
I
I
think
would like to say is,
yes,
please see things from Russian angle.
right. I want
Which
you to see
means-
from the Russian angle,
Yeah.
and what can be the impact of all these things. Can there be any serious sanction imposed on Russia by the West? And before where does India stand in all these things? What kind of stand should India
So
take?
you should understand from Russia's the strategic depth. See, when 1991, when the whole Soviet Union fell apart, the understanding at that time was that the eastern border would not be closer to Russia. But if you were to see Ukraine going away, Moscow will be 500, 600 kilometers away from that. You see from their angle. Secondly, they have no access to warm water, as you know. So Crimea was very important for their existence, very existence. To my mind, the eastern Ukraine crisis is a bit of a sideshow. The main issue was for Russia was the presence in having bases, naval bases. Earlier they were leased out. Of course, I mean, you also must remember that it was...
Sir, we are running out of time.
Okay,
I want
right,
you to
right.
quickly... No, I want you to respond to this.
Yeah.
What kind of an impact will this... Can the West really impose some serious sanctions against Russia?
No, but if they do so, and they are already doing it, but they will also hurt themselves in the process.
They will hurt themselves.
Absolutely.
And what about India's position on this?
India position, three things. Firstly, we should see, first of all, the security of Indians, which has been taken care of. I think the students have been taken. But the strategic interest, which means, and I think the Air Marshal would second me, our source for various spare parts, etc., we still are getting. Thirdly, the business interest. We are talking about the pharmaceuticals and chemicals, fertilizers. Now, these are the strategic interests for us. So we should not get caught
too closely involved in that.
No, we should not get caught in this crossfire. That is taking place.
Very quickly, sir.
Absolutely, I agree. Just three quick points.
Very
I
quick,
think we have been extremely cautious and careful. We cannot do with caution alone. You can't sit back. This time, you will have to do some nimble diplomatic footwork to ensure India's interests are safeguarded. Because while our interests involving Russia have been very ably outlined by Mr. Soni, the other part is also very critical because you have a close relationship with the United States.
Absolutely.
You have a close relationship.
That's where the balancing act needs to be done, Professor.
No, but we have seen India's position. When we have some strategic ally, even if it kills 500, Palestinians, we are silent. I'm sure if Russia is a strategic partner, India will go by silence rather than taking sides also. This is my point. Because in Israel, we are seeing 500 Delhi killings, but we are silent. Because Israel we consider as a strategic ally.
No, but the problem is silence here is going to lead to a situation that Putin will be accompanied by Mr. Narendra Modi into the doghouse of the international
BRICS House.
That's important. That's important.
It's all very interesting and also delicate. Balancing act needs to be done. We have to remember that very recently, just last week, during the BRICS summit, our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, had a lot of good words to say about Russia. He invited Russian president to come and visit India and Kulam and all that.
5 seconds.
Yes.
In President's address to the Parliament, which indicates the government's policy, Russia, Japan and China have been bundled together in one paragraph, and there's one full paragraph on the United States.
Okay, so
that'll give you an idea of what Mr. Modi's
these things can.
Government has.
They're bound to be these kind of going into the finer details of it, but we'll wait and watch how it will all develop. But as far as what's happening in Ukraine is concerned, is a matter of great concern to not just India, to the entire world. We'll wait and watch whether a proper investigation could be done on this entire shooting episode. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Ambassador Soni, Air Marshal Kak, Professor Ajay Kumar Patnaik and Nandan Unnikrishnan who had joined us earlier. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in Big Picture same time tomorrow.
Thank you.